There are a lot of great things going on at the University of Louisville in research and academics, athletics, community engagement, and partnerships with industry. And those are the things we talk about here on U of L Today with Mark Hebert. That's what you've tuned into here on Talk Radio 1080 WKJK. Well, welcome to the show. The second half of today's program, we'll be chatting with two young ladies, U of L graduates who just returned to the U.S. from a year overseas. They won prestigious Fulbright scholarships. They'll be here to talk about their experiences in Greece and Romania. But first, if we're going to send astronauts on long space missions, we better figure out how to keep them healthy through diet and exercise. That's some of the cool research that John Caruso is working on. He's a professor in the Department of Health and Sports Sciences at the University of Louisville. John, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Mark.
Yeah, always good to talk to you about the interesting stuff that you're working on. So let's talk just in broad terms. What do you do, and what are some of your research areas that you're interested in that you're working on right now?
My PhD is in exercise physiology, and after I earned my PhD, I did a postdoc working for NASA at the Johnson Space Center. And basically, I utilize exercise, and to a lesser extent, diet, as a treatment that may help impact a person's health or performance for the better. And in a broad sense, that's what I do. I don't just work with athletes. I work with all sorts of people who may need such recommendations. This includes things like disuse atrophy models, the elderly, people with a pre-existing medical condition. So it literally runs the gamut. Yeah.
But you've got a special interest in what's going on in space because you did that work with NASA, right?
True, that's right.
So, all right, well, let's talk about one of the projects then that you're working on right now. You did a study, some research,
correct,
on diets in space, basically. So you tell me what the study was about, and then we'll go from there.
I originally partnered up with this project with a registered dietitian who was part of our program, Kathy Carter, whom you once met. And we got on the topic of diets, and I said, Kathy, the traditional NASA diet hasn't changed much in over 50 years. And initially, when space flights were less than a day, that wasn't such a hardship. That was okay. The diet worked just fine. But I said, Kathy, I'm involved in this exercise countermeasures movement with NASA, and they're putting people aboard the International Space Station for 6 months to a year, and they're exercising several hours a day, up to 7 days a week. I said, is that simple, old, traditional NASA diet good enough now? Or should there be something
provide them enough calories if they're working out that much up in space?
Right. Should we look in terms of, optimizing that diet? What should we do? And we procured some funding from the Kentucky Space Grant Consortium. We compared two diets, the traditional NASA diet to one more geared towards exercise enhancement.
All right, so what's the difference? What's the traditional NASA diet? We always think of, it's a packet that you fill up with water.
That's right.
That's what they're eating, or drinking Tang, the orange stuff.
I think the traditional NASA diet, in terms of macronutrient breakdown, it's 55% carbohydrate, 30% fat, 15% protein.
Okay. So not much protein.
Yeah, and everything's dehydrated.
Right.
And we looked at a diet that was higher in protein. The traditional NASA diet is 15%. We looked at 30%. And we had subjects do both versions of the diet in a randomized sequence. Kathy Carter prescribed the diets.
She's a dietitian.
Correct. And these were isocaloric diets initially. And I mean, that's for the entire study, isocaloric, meaning these diets weren't intended to put weight on or take weight off. We wanted to look at the macronutrient breakdown in and of themselves. Which would be better? To make a long story short, we had subjects after each 2-week diet come into our laboratory and do a workout on an exercise device designed for use in outer space. This workout took approximately 35 minutes. We did pre-exercise measurements. Of course, we measured during and then post-exercise. They were tethered to a metabolic cart. We measured respiratory gases. We measured oxygen. We measured carbon dioxide. We measured blood lactate, which is a measure of carbohydrate utilization. If you ever exercise and get a burning sensation, that's lactate.
Right.
And some of the results...
Yeah, I was going to say, so what'd you find?
Some of the results were predictable, but the major result that we found is exercise performance was better with the high-protein diet. People were able to do more work. And that was surprising to me. And we're in the process right now of writing up that article as to explain why this occurrence may have taken place.
Talk with John Caruso from the University of Louisville. He's from the Department of Health and Sports Sciences, and he works on some stuff in space, some healthy things to do in space. So I guess what would be the use of this for NASA if they're getting ready to send someone to Mars, for instance, on a long mission? How could they use this information about what the diet should be that you did in your research to help those astronauts as they head to Mars and back?
Based on the results of our study, they may want to increase protein intake in their astronauts.
And how do you do that? I mean, it's not like they got a bunch of pork chops up there in space, you know. So how do you do that?
You've got to come up with a way to do. I mean, I'm sure NASA knows of ways to increase protein consumption and intake of their astronauts' diets. Once again, they're not sitting in a Barco lounge or space chair for 2 or 3 hours and then returning to Earth. They're up there and they're very physically involved, physically engaged. NASA wants these people exercising to stay in shape, to maintain muscle mass and bone mineral density. And apparently a high-protein diet may help them do that.
Well, let's talk just a tad more about some of the research you've done in terms of astronauts and stuff. You have also done, I think, some sleep studies and look at exercise and some other things involving what would happen in space, right? So briefly tell me about a couple of those.
A few years ago, probably the most famous study I did, or most intensive study I did, is I put people on crutches for 40 days, where one leg refrained from ambulatory activity, and that leg literally mimicked the similar changes in muscle mass and muscle strength to somebody who's been in outer space for 40 days. It was tough to find subjects, but I did, and I got the articles published.
I want to let my muscles atrophy for 40 days. That'd be great.
We had to give them incentives.
You had to give them some cash. Just say it, John. Okay.
And in some subjects, we gave them a placebo. In some subjects, we gave them something called albuterol, which is a bronchodilator. And in conjunction with resistive exercise, albuterol has strength retaining or strength building effects, and that could help people stay strong and healthy in outer space.
And so that's what you found, was they needed some kind of supplement or something?
It would augment all the exercise they were doing. Yes.
But you had these guys on crutches for 40 days.
Right.
Jeez. You don't wish that on your worst enemy. That didn't sound like a whole lot of fun study. No wonder you had to pay him.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about something else you're working on. You're working on a fancy glove.
Correct.
Tell us about your glove and what it is.
Okay. The glove idea comes from a study I started back at my prior place of employment, which dealt with palm cooling. I had a crazy old buddy of mine who was a chemistry professor at University of Tulsa. And he said, "John, what do you know about palm cooling?" I said, "This is crazy. What are you talking about?" And he comes up with crazy off-the-wall sorts of things. And I looked into it, and this palm cooling stuff basically helps with heat exchange and heat loss, which is a big deal with athletes, and a lot of people don't realize it. So I did a palm cooling study, and the results turned out great. And basically, palm cooling involves conduction. Now, conduction is taking two objects and putting them together. Two objects of different temperature, heat will be transferred between those two objects. So if you take your warm hand and put it against a cold object, there will be heat exchange.
Right.
And the palm of the hand is particularly efficacious for heat exchange.
So when you talk to people about the extremities, keeping your extremities warm in the winter, because your hand, your top of your head, other areas, those are the areas that will cool your body off fast.
Soles of your feet.
Soles of the feet. You're saying essentially the palm of your hand is a a hot spot, for lack of that's a bad term, but a hot spot for cooling off the rest of your
Right,
body.
heat transfers.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And the results turned out great with this study. And I came to U of L and I gave a job interview in 2015. And I talked about palm cooling. And I said, I want to make a glove and I want to do another study on this topic. It's really interesting. And this past year I did that.
Okay.
And also this past year, I got a provisional patent through the Office of Technology Transfer on gloves that cool the palms of your hand when worn. And I'm right now in the process of getting gloves built that, when worn, cool the palm of your hand. My research shows that intermittent palm cooling, where you apply the cold and you remove the cold over and over again, helps with heat loss. And this is a major problem. Hyperthermia is the third leading cause of death amongst athletes. Mm-hmm. A lot of people overheat on a daily basis, and they don't realize it because, and this is a scary thing about humans, we're not well attuned to recognizing when we're overheating. I mean, it can happen, and all of a sudden, you're in a serious health predicament. So, educating people on hyperthermia and taking steps to alleviate it is very important.
Okay, we're talking with John Caruso from the University of Louisville in the Department of Health and Sports Sciences. So I guess you're talking, football players? Who could potentially be the beneficiary of these gloves, these cooling gloves?
Okay, athletes, of course, because they exercise a lot, they'll overheat. The typical way we get rid of excess heat is called evaporation, which is just a fancy term for sweating. But if we can augment it with things like conductive heat loss and palm cooling, we can reduce the heat strain and reduce the risk of heat-related injury. Laborers working outside in the hot sun all day, whether they're picking vegetables or pounding shingles on a roof or mowing lawns, that's another potential avenue for this glove. The military. I've talked to people who said, we're going to go back to the Middle East and troops on the ground and all this sort of stuff. I'm like, okay. And they said, Baghdad, Iraq in the summertime gets up to 130 degrees.
Yeah, I know, it's hot.
And the infantry, the foot soldiers, they walk around, they got 60 pounds of gear on their bodies as they go on maneuvers. And it's just, the heat load is just tremendous.
So how much could these gloves reduce the body heat and the heat loss in a body, say over an hour? I'm in 100-degree heat and I'm overheating. How much could it cut?
We're trying to quantify that literally with future research. I know we get statistically significant changes with palm cooling. The palm cooling study I did here at the University of Louisville was done in my laboratory with a rowing ergometer, and people wore gloves. And I don't know if you ever rode an ergometer. It can get it really, really challenging.
A little toasty.
Yeah, and we saw a statistically significant difference with the palm cooling. Palm cooling workouts, they could row farther. Their heart rates were lower. Their blood lactate was lower. They had all the signs that, they could better tolerate the exercise challenge.
And as always, you're looking for investors, I assume, to invest in this glove and get
Right.
it to market, right?
That's the goal. I hopefully by the end of the summer, before the fall semester starts, I'll have gloves fabricated. And at this point, I can go to the Office of Technology Transfers. Let's look for investors. Let's look for potential partners. The Office of Technology Transfers have said, John, you're good at doing research and publishing papers. Now we got, you're going to attract investors. You need a product.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah.
So
You gotta have
that's what I'm trying to do.
You got to have a product that the investors can see and touch and figure out how it works. So, but the Office of Technology Transfer at U of L is very good at that. So
Yes, they are.
About helping those of you who are faculty members at the University of Louisville get your discoveries to market. So hopefully that'll work out, and we'll be wearing these gloves, and they'll be ubiquitous. We'll see them on NFL games or something.
We'll see. I got my
Sunday.
fingers crossed.
All right, so do we. All right, John Caruso, always good to talk to you, and got a lot of interesting stuff going on in your lab.
A lot of stuff going on.
Appreciate
Yes.
you being on the show.
Thank you, Mark.
University of Louisville graduates have won 133 Fulbright scholarships since 2003. That is more than all other Kentucky colleges and universities combined. And two of those winners are Karen Udo and Kimber Gwynn, who just returned from their overseas Fulbright adventures. And they're sitting here in front of me. Kimber, good to see you again. And Karen, good to see you as well.
Good to see you, too.
Well, first of all, welcome home. Welcome back to America.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah.
So was it tough to get back in the swing of things when you got back in town?
Not really. I had about 3 weeks off before I
came back to work. So I kind of used that time to visit with friends and family and like give my dog a lot of pets, and then came back to work, and it feels like no time has passed.
Same with you, Karen?
No.
No.
Mine's the exact opposite. There's a 7-hour difference, so the sleeping was a bit rough coming back, and then I had to start one of my U of L programs, PMAT, for medical school 2 days after. So I've kind of been back to back and no breaks, but it's still fun to be back home and seeing friends and family.
All right, well, let's back up a little bit. Karen, where did you go with your Fulbright? Where were you?
So I was in the northern part of Greece, in a city called Alexandroupoli. It's a small town, about 50 to 60,000 residents, but it was a lot of fun. It's a college town too, so there's a lot of students around my age, and I was able to really hang out with them and also get to know the university resources as well.
So you were not out in the middle of nowhere.
No.
All right, Kimber, where were you?
I was in Iași, Romania. It's about 6 hours north of Bucharest. So that's what people think of when they think of Romania. They just know Bucharest. So kind of middle of nowhere. It is a huge town, though. It's about 400,000 people that live there. So lots of things to do. It's close to Moldova, close to some mountains. So it's beautiful.
And you traveled a lot. We'll talk about that here in a minute. And for folks who don't know what a Fulbright scholarship is, how do you explain that? What do you tell folks when they say, you went on a Fulbright? What's that? What does that mean? What do you tell them? Come on, you got to tell them something, right? You're both looking at me with these little looks on your faces. Isn't that hard?
Well, I was trying to think. Well, essentially, it's an international exchange program, but there's different parts. So you have students who can go abroad, especially at least from the American side, to teach English in different countries. You also have students who just do a master's program. And then you also have students who just do research, which is what I did. So I just did research abroad. So it's different parts. And then they also have smaller scholarships within Fulbright. So it's a pretty big international exchange program is how I'll sum it up.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
That's pretty accurate. And Kimber, you actually work in the international travel at the University of Louisville. You help line up students, right?
Right, yep.
So here you are doing it yourself, right?
Yeah.
But the Fulbright is paid for by the U.S. government. It's named after a former U.S. senator, and they started this program years ago, right? So it's a big deal. It's a way for, I think, as I understand it, the way for the United States to try and put its best foot forward. Is that a
Pretty
fair
much,
assessment?
yeah.
So did you two put your best foot forward? You didn't embarrass the United States or embarrass the University of
I
Louisville?
like to think that I did a pretty
Yeah,
good
I
job.
was about to say I tried.
Yeah, did our best.
Yes.
All right, talking with Karen Udo and Kimber Gwynn, who just returned from their Fulbright scholarship adventures overseas, and we're talking about what they did while they were over there. So let's talk a little bit. Let's maybe start with you, Kimber. What did you do in Romania?
So I was an English teaching assistant, or an ETA, and I was able to teach for the fall and spring semesters at Cuza University in Iași. And each semester I taught 3 classes. I had first, second, and third years, so I got to see the gauntlet of all the students. The first years were really nervous. They had that, oh, we're in college now, what do we do type of attitude that I think is common across the world for college students. And then spring semester, my students were a bit more relaxed. They didn't feel like freaked out about college, and so we were able to have more intense conversations in class.
And how was their English in
Actually, it
Romania?
was fantastic. I would
Really?
say I was incredibly impressed because they start learning English when they're in elementary school. So they have an entirely different attitude about language learning abroad. So they start when they're really young. Most of my students have been learning for at least 10 years. And honestly, their English was probably better than mine at some times. Like they knew grammar like the back of their
Better
hand.
grammar than we
Exactly.
Yeah,
did.
and I was
exactly.
like, you guys are great with grammar. So thank you for teaching me
That's
this.
What was the biggest hurdle that you had to overcome as a teacher and as someone living in a foreign country and teaching English to kids that you didn't know?
I think the hardest thing, honestly, was just introducing them to the American style of education that we have over here. They don't have interaction like icebreaker games or get to know you type things. They just go to class, they get lectured to, they have their exam, that's it.
Really?
So I tried to incorporate, okay, let's do some fun activities, let's be engaging. And they kind of
Like talk to each other? Kind
yeah,
of stuff?
like group work and presentations,
okay,
and they
yeah.
had no idea how to take that. So I had to really walk them through, give them a rubric, tell them my expectations. And by the end of it, they really liked it. But at first, it was an obstacle to be like, okay, this is how you do this, and this is why we are doing this.
And Karen Udo, what were you doing in Greece?
So in Greece, For most of the time, I did research. So I was a research student at Democritus University of Thrace, and essentially in the lab, what I did was my research was focused on microbiology, in particular, looking at the way that the gut bacteria, so bacteria in our gut, metabolize different drugs and toxins and carcinogens that we intake from our external environment, also just what's in our body overall. So that was just the bigger picture of my research, and hopefully it was to help with later on seeing how we all have different compositions of our gut bacteria and how that will later translate to personalized medicine. Because we notice how there's some people who they have this type of disease and they take medicine for it and they're okay, they're better, while others are more resistant. So we think that has a lot to do with the bacteria that's in your gut and how maybe some people have more populations of this ones compared to others. But that was what I did most of the time in Greece. But I did some side projects because I love to get involved and I love to get to know the Greek people as well. So I did two different parts. I joined the theater club at the university, which it was very fun.
So
it was
you're
all
doing Greek theater.
Yeah, so it was fun. It was a great time. I mostly didn't want to do too much because I had a lot to do with research because I was there all day, but it was nice to take a break and get to know some of the Greek students as well and have like an artistic way of expressing just how you feel. And then I also volunteered at ARSIS, which was a shelter for unaccompanied children that arrive at the border, because Greece, they have
refugees.
Yes, and because Greece has they have been dealing with the refugee crisis for quite some time now. And so that is something that I wanted to look into more and talk to the children that are coming. And that was really great. I've loved that part, especially just getting to know the children and seeing their struggles and their journeys.
And most of the refugees that you dealt with, where were they from? Were they from Syria? Or
they're from different parts. Yeah, Syria and Afghanistan, Iraq, Kuwait, Eritrea, Somalia, so they're from like all parts.
All over the place,
yes,
yeah.
and we even had one from Vietnam. So yeah,
How did they get from
yeah,
Vietnam to
exactly. So it was very eye opening, but it was a very humbling experience as well. So it was a great time.
Okay. Again, we're talking with Karen Udo and Kimber Gwynn. I'm sorry, Kimber, blanked on your name there for a second.
Yeah.
Kimber Gwynn, they're both Fulbright scholars, just returned to the United States from their respective countries, Romania and Greece. What would you two say is the view of Americans in the countries you went to, in Romania and Greece?
I would say in Romania, there's kind of a brain drain going on with their young folks. So oftentimes the students will finish high school and then leave Romania to go elsewhere for college. And they kind of see America as like the dream.
Really?
They want to come here to work. They want to come here to make money. They want to come here to get the American accent because they watch a lot of Netflix, and they're like, that's like their goal. We want to be able to speak with the American accent. So they used to have a really positive view of the States. Of course, there were a few people who were like surprised or had questions about the U.S. that it's like, that is entirely wrong.
Well, like what? What was the perception they had that was wrong?
Well, they often think Americans are obese. So one of my one of my students that I volunteered with at the American Corner in Yash, they were elderly students from the community, and the first thing one said to me was, "You're not fat." And I'm like, okay.
Congratulations to me.
Yeah, I'm like, thank you, I guess. But they're just very direct people too, so if it comes to their mind, they're going to say it. So it's kind of what you got to
I'd fit
expect.
right in there.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. And you said, I think in a note you sent to me, you said your hairdresser said
Yes.
something about Netflix or something.
Yeah,
What was it? What was
exactly.
that?
He said it felt like he was watching Netflix when he was talking to me because of the accent. And I just will always remember that because it was hilarious. And I was like, there is no way. But he said, yeah, that he could talk to me all day. And so even after the appointment was over, we chatted for another like 45 minutes just because he wanted to hear the accent.
Just wanted to hear you talk.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Karen, what was your experience with the Greek folks, Greek people? What did they say about America and Americans?
I feel like with Americans, I mean, they have a very positive experience and just overall outlook. A lot of it's similar very in Greece with the brain drain. A lot of younger students at least want to leave Greece to go to other parts of Western Europe, mostly like Germany, or go to the United States. That's like their dream. So that's something that I noticed talking to them. And also there were some like perceptions of Americans that they really enjoyed, especially when I told them that I'm from Kentucky. They're like, oh
Kentucky
my
Fried
God.
Chicken?
Yeah, that's the only thing they knew about Kentucky. And it was very funny. And it was weird to like have someone say that, oh, wow, I love your accents. And I was just like, wow, it's different when like you're out and abroad and someone's complimenting you that. But I think another big thing for me was a perception of who American is. Because a lot of people, when looking at me, especially in my town, because I was pretty much the only, there was very few people of color that lived in my town. So a lot of people didn't assume I was American. They thought I was somewhere, either other parts of Europe
From Africa or
yeah,
something.
somewhere from Africa.
Because you are African.
Yeah.
For folks on the radio, she's African American.
Yeah, and so that was very interesting to when they heard me talk or when they heard me speak Greek. They noticed like, oh, they start asking more questions like, where are you from? And I was like, oh, I'm from the States. And then they were so surprised. So that was something too, the perception of who an American is. But overall, they had a very positive view because especially with the tourists that come to Greece, they also have a good experience with Americans.
Good. Talking to Karen Udo and Kimber Gwynn, Fulbright scholars, recent graduates of the University of Louisville. And as I said earlier, U of L has had 133 Fulbright scholars since 2003, which is more than all other Kentucky universities and colleges combined. Yes, it's a big deal for us. We're very proud of that, and we're very proud of you too. So what's next for the two of you?
Well, I've kind of already jumped back into my job. I'm a study abroad advisor here on campus, so I've been back in the office about a week and getting caught up with my mass amounts of emails from 9 months being gone and planning events. Maybe a PhD in the future. Who knows? We'll see on how motivated I feel.
And I guess you can tell folks now, hey, I can talk all about going abroad because have you done this twice now? That you did study abroad?
Oh, I studied abroad 3 times in college,
I
and
knew
then
you
I've
did.
traveled
I knew you did.
extensively on my own and then Fulbright for 9 months.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. Karen?
For me, well, next week I start my medical school orientation here at U of L, so I'm very excited. And it's a little nerve-wracking, but I'm really excited because now it's like I'm actually starting to pursue my endeavors to become a medical doctor, and so that's pretty much my next step right now, and focusing on that and doing well.
Okay. And last question. What would you tell folks who either they're students at the University of Louisville already or they're considering coming to the University of Louisville about A, the support and what they get once they get to U of L to perhaps apply for a Fulbright or another scholarship, and B, for international travel opportunities? And Kimber, you should be right on.
I know, this
on
is right
one.
on your
Yeah,
alley.
right
How
up
long
your
do
alley.
to be? I can talk for another 20 minutes.
Yeah, you got about a minute and a half.
I would say international travel is one of the best things you can possibly do while you're a student. Take advantage of it, only because it gives you an opportunity to see other perspectives of the world, and that will influence your own abilities once you come back to the States and help your academic career. And that also will help you decide if you really want to do a more extended like Fulbright experience. If you've done a month or a semester long study abroad and you're like, hey, I really loved that, definitely apply for a Fulbright because it will help your application.
Again, congratulations, Kimber Gwynn, Karen Udo, on your win in the Fulbright. Thanks for listening to U of L Today with Mark Hebert, and go Cards.